So this week I decided to do a little experimentation and try out a couple different cinematic lighting techniques that I use all the time, but with a little twist. Because nowadays, whenever I'm lighting a commercial, I always have my professional lights with me. I use aperture lights for nearly everything, and whenever I need something bigger, we usually have the budget to rent out those bigger area HMIs, the M40s or the M90s. Recently, I watched a bunch of behind-the-scenes videos from big Hollywood movies, and even their DPs a lot of times use these simple household light bulbs, mostly for practicals, but there are times when the practicals are lighting up the whole scene. The cool thing about these light bulbs is that they actually have a higher CRI rating than most filmmaking lights. All the aperture lights, all the area HMIs have a CRI rating around 90 to 96 depending on the model, but these light bulbs actually have a CRI rating of 100 on the dot, which is the highest you can get, and our sun is rated at 100. So CRI is the short form of color rendering index, and it is the measurement of how natural colors render under artificial light sources compared to the sun, and this scale ranges from 0 to 100. Although filmmaking lights with CRI above 90 or 95 are really close, they are not quite there, and they are simply just not as good as halogen light sources or the sun. So for this experiment, since I'm only using regular 60 watt household light bulbs, I try to keep all my other equipment as minimal as well. I spent a total of 35 bucks on everything, and I bought 4 light bulbs, 4 sockets for these light bulbs, some black paper, 2 china balls, and a shower curtain. A little disclaimer that for this video I only wanted to test out the lighting setups, which means I didn't do any set design or anything like that. I shot everything in my living room in a pretty small place, so yeah, just keep that in mind. So for the first setup, I wanted to try out a really simple 2-point lighting setup, a big diffuse light source from the left and an edge light from the right. I started off by setting up the big diffuse light source, and for this I just placed down 2 C-stands, stretched my shower curtain between them, and I tried to place the whole rig in around like a 45-degree angle, 1.5 meters away from myself. Next I put down 2 more light stands and I mounted my little light bulb sockets onto them, and I'm really happy that I went with these options, because mounting regular sockets to a light stand would have been a lot harder. I screw my bulbs in and then I turned them on immediately to just see what kind of output I'm getting, and they were surprisingly bright, which is great. The next step was adding the edge light, and for this I pulled out my boom stand, mounted the socket onto it, and I placed it behind myself on the right side. But when I turned it on, I immediately realized that it's way too bright and also spreads too much. So I created a little softbox for it from some black paper and some shower curtain at the end, and I mounted the whole thing with some regular tape. But when you're doing this kind of stuff, just make sure that you leave some room for the air to go through, because otherwise these bulbs can get really hot and they can easily melt or burn things. As a final touch, I added 1 china ball in the back as a practical to make it seem that that is giving me the edge light, and that's it. I think this setup turned out really good, and looking at the results, I feel like no one could tell if this was lit with professional filmmaking lights or with just a couple light bulbs. For the second setup, I decided to light the whole scene with my bigger china ball and nothing else. I started off by putting together my bigger boom stand and mounting my light socket and my china ball onto it. I wanted to set up like a little restaurant table scene, so I used my kitchen table for this with 2 chairs, and I mounted the china ball right above this. When I first turned on the light, I realized that there was just way too much spill happening, and since I'm in a small room, that really started to show, so I grabbed some black paper and some duct tape and I tried to control the light with these, and I think it turned out pretty okay. Now with these setups, it really matters what kind of table are you using. For this I just used a simple black glass table, and that wasn't reflecting back any light, but if you're using like a brown or a white table, that will reflect back a lot more light, which might be good or bad depending on your goal. Here I wanted to get a little bit more light onto my face, so I decided to put in my bounce board on the table, and that did the trick really well. But obviously I needed to cut that one out so it doesn't show on the final footage. Now when you're doing these kind of setups, you might be able to use a bounce board for the close-ups, but you will definitely need to take it out for the wider shots. But if you know that you just want or need to get more light on the actor's face from the beginning, just use a white or a lighter table and that will solve all your problems. Another thing you can do with these setups is to just place a practical light in the middle of the table, and that will also help to get a lot more light onto the actor's face. For the next setup, I decided to put together my shower curtain rig again with 2 bulbs behind it, and my idea was to create a 2-source lighting setup and make it look like that all the light is coming from a practical source. I placed down my China ball desk light again and framed the shot so it's on my side a little but also behind me. I turned it on, and as you can see the output was really low and just not enough to light up the whole scene, but I wanted to make it look like it was enough, so I turned on my shower curtain setup as well and placed it on the same side in an angle to make it as realistic as possible. It's a really simple setup. All you need is 3 light bulbs and a dark room. You might have to play around a little bit with the angles and the intensity to make it as realistic as possible, but it doesn't get any simpler than this. For the next setup, I wanted to do another top light rig, but with the hard source this time. The setup was really easy again. I framed my shot, put down my boom stand, and I mounted my light socket onto it. I wanted to turn it on before proceeding just to see what kind of output I'm getting, and it wasn't bad, but there was just way too much spill happening and I wanted to create a spotlight, so I created this tube from black paper and I just taped it to the bulb, and that solved the problem. It was getting better, but still I think it was a bit too hard, so I decided to soften it up with some haze. Now I don't have a hazer, so I just turned on my smoke machine and waited till it was nice and even across the room. At this point it was already looking a lot better, and for some projects I might just leave it like this, but today I wanted to add a bounce board under my face to bring up the shadows a little bit. This totally depends on taste. Some people would never do this, some people would even put in reflectors. I think my foam core bounce board was a nice middle ground between these. Moving on to the final setup, I decided to do another 2-point lighting setup, but with different techniques this time. So first I placed down the edge light behind myself on the left, but this time I wanted to keep it in frame. My goal was to have this edge light as the hard source and make the key light on the opposite side a bit softer, but not too soft. So I placed down the second bulb right next to myself, and it wasn't looking too bad, but I wanted to make it wrap around my face more and also a bit softer. Instead of using some kind of diffusion, I went with using 2 bounce boards and I put them down in like an arc shape pointing towards me. I had to play around with the angles a little bit till I got it right, but at the end I think it turned out pretty well, and the bounce boards really helped to make the light source softer and to make it wrap around my face. My whole point with this experiment was to prove that you don't need expensive lights to create nicely lit cinematic scenes, and it was also a great exercise for me. Now, it was definitely a lot harder to work with these lights. They are less reliable when it comes to shaping the light. You just simply can't do a bunch of things with them, and that's why I kept it simple in this video. Overall, I think it was a great experiment / exercise. I recommend everyone to try these setups out at home, see what you like, just play around with them. But yeah, I think that was it for today. Let me know if you like this video, subscribe if you want to see more content like this, and I will see you guys in the next one.